kind of hard to cool down, because my story has to do with fire.
Because I got a sure way to beat the heat.
You mean there is a ghost and it's not just a ghost story?
I just found him one day out in the woodshed, all curled up like he was trying to keep warm.
Fire will do anything to survive and grow. Of course, it's our job to stop it. The spirit of the fire remains. The fire ghost.
Kick it.
Welcome to Splat Attack, a 90s podcast honoring the slime-filled past. I'm your hot-headed fire extinguisher, Alex.
And I'm your frigid little boy guest co-host, Courtland. With the weather being so cold lately, what are you going to do to get through the winter today?
Well, other than bundling up with a nice warm coat or having some freshly boiled hot chocolate, because I hate the cold, I feel like the Midnight Society can lend a hand in helping us cool down quick.
Ah, so you mean we're doing another Are You Afraid of the Dark episode battle this season?
Right you are! We've always had so much fun. We actually did a 3 Vampire Tales episode on Halloween for our Patreon, and we felt that it need to give it another whirl. But this time, instead of doing a 3-way battle, it's a classic war raging between the elements of fire and ice. So depending on your temperature preference, fire, things are going to get hot in here before we all chill out.
All right, well, before we suit up for war, let's bring our guest judge from the cold, shall we?
I guess so. He needs a little bit longer to thaw out near the Midnight Society campfire so he can be energized enough to join us. So let's get him here by the campfire, warm himself up, and here, have a seat on the stone throne. Welcome, Bryce. How are you doing today?
You know what? Tomorrow is Friday, so I'm doing pretty good. I'm just excited to talk about Are You Afraid of the Dark and hear about these 2 episodes.
And I'm excited. I'm just excited to have you both here, to be perfectly honest. Courtland has been just a pioneer for us, and he's been a huge supporter of our podcast ever since we got started, and his show is absolutely fantastic, and is a great guy. And when Brett had to step down, Courtland was one of the few people who stepped up and said, if you ever need any help, let me know. And it really means a lot to me that you took that step forward. I mean, I would have hollered at you anyway to do an Are You Afraid of the Dark anything, because it almost feels blasphemous to have Are You Afraid of the Dark and have you not be involved somehow, because we've done so much. But then the individual that we had to be a part of this episode had to step down. He was not Brett, but our guest judge. He had messaged me shortly before Christmas. I don't want to say who, because that's not really important, but he's had a pretty major life hurdle and had to step down. It really was upset by it. If you're listening, you know who you are, and love you. Thank you so much for all your support. But then at that point, I was going, man, who are we going to get to guest judge? I know some people, but I'm less into the Are You Afraid of the Dark circle of fans and creators and things like that, far less than Courtland is. So I passed the buck to Courtland and said, do you know anybody who would be a good fit for this? And lo and behold, we have Bryce here joining us, and I'm very excited to have you both here. Thank you, Courtland, for guest co-hosting, and thank you, Bryce, for joining to be our guest judge for this episode.
My pleasure. Yeah, I'm happy to help out. We've been in a Tales from the Crypt space, so it is very refreshing to come back to kind of what our roots were, and I'm really glad that I can spend some time with you and Bryce, because we're gonna have fun.
Yeah.
But before we really get into the episode and discussing these 2 fire and ice battle episodes I'm really excited about, Bryce, since this is your first time on the show, what has your experience been with Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Oh my gosh. So I get the consensus that we're probably all millennials. I came along right at the perfect time for television. Nickelodeon We were not a Disney household. We were a Nickelodeon household.
Is your home a Nickelodeon home?
And every Friday night it was Snick. And I saw Are You Afraid of the Dark? My mom warned me and she said, this show is going to scare you. And I did not listen to her. And I remember tuning in. And I think the first episode I saw was The Tale of the Prom Queen.
Ooh, that's a good
And
one.
it is a very good one. And it scared me because I walked away from that episode with such an existential crisis because I'm like, oh my gosh, she was only like 17 years old and she
Oh
died.
no.
And I'm like, is that like how it's gonna be for me? And so like I wasn't even scared by the fact that she was a ghost. I was just stuck on the fact that, oh no, this young girl, her, life is cut down very shortly. And so I was hooked. I love the Midnight Society. I love all the members. Yes, I even like Stig. Has Stig is 2-0 as far as I'm concerned. He's told two of the best stories, and I know Stig gets a lot of crap. I love Stig. I even like the newer Midnight Society when Tucker took over. Vange, Quinn, Megan, and Andy. I love those kids. And I even like the mini series they've been doing, and I'm hoping that I think his name, Courtland, keep me honest, is it TJ?
Yep. TJ Billings.
TJ Billings makes more of those. I don't think he did the first one, but I know he did the second and the third one, and I like the idea that the Midnight Society exists in all these different places around the country,
Mm-hmm.
really Canada, but all over the country. And I just
All
hope
the
this show,
provinces.
yeah, I just hope this show continues to do, make more miniseries. And the beauty of this show, you guys, is that the episodes, most of them still hold up. Like I still watch what is the one? Dark Music, and that
Yep.
ending is so eerie, so
Mhm.
eerie. So I think it's cool that my friends are introducing the show to their kids. So I think the lasting power of Are You Afraid of the Dark is going to go on and on.
But with that being said, and our love for 90s nostalgia just getting started, let's dive into the battlefield. And I'm going to grab my sword. And no, I'm Fire Ghost. I'm going to grab my shield. And Courtland will have his sword. We'll join out on the battlefield. So let's get this battle started. All right, for this episode, obviously we're going to be looking at two very, very special episodes, Fire and Ice themed. And for the episode details, before we really go into the categories, the first one we're going to look at is The Tale of the Frozen Ghost. And you all know me. I'm horrible with names, so feel free to correct me when I butcher this, Courtland.
Happens to me all the time. It's okay.
This Tale of the Frozen Ghost came out for season 2, episode 7. It was written by Naomi Jensen, and it was directed by Ron
Oil, right?
Olivier.
Ron Olivier. And the air date was August 14th, 1993. And the second one, the one that I will be defending, is Tale of the Fire Ghost. This was from season 4, episode 10. It was written by Scott Peters and directed by Jean-Marie Camille.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. See, this is why I don't do names. And the air date was December 10th, 1994. In side tangent, when it came to naming my children, I would not name them. Because I cannot come up with good names. I would butcher names. That was my skill set. Megan would be, well, how about this name? And I'd find a way to make fun of it. And she gets so mad at me after about the 20th time. She said, why do you keep messing with all the names? I said, because if I can, the children at school can. And she went, oh, okay. So, but yeah, names. I'm terrible with them. But I'm going to step aside and I'm going to let Bryce take over as judging responsibilities, starting with Bryce. Tell us what the categories are.
Okay, Alex. So our categories for tonight, we're going to be judging on five of them. The first being story. That includes the bookends with the Midnight Society. Our second category will be main character duo. So each of these episodes features two main characters. So we'll be judging which of those two pairings we feel is the best. Category number three, that is the ghost character. So the main antagonist of each episode. Number four is the use of the elemental theme. So for Frozen Ghost, it would be ice, and for the Fire Ghost, it would be fire. And lastly, our fifth category will be lasting appeal, meaning as of January 4th, 2024, how does each episode stack up in, today's climate as far as like what's on TV right now?
Well, then I will leave it to you to start to ping pong us back and forth. So, who do you want to hear from first, and what's our first category?
Alex, I want you to start us off. We're going to be talking about story. And again, we're talking also about the bookend elements with the Midnight Society. Generally, they have their own drama going on before and after. So you have the Frozen Ghost episode. Tell us about the story.
Now, I've got Fire Ghost, but I can still do
Oh,
Fire
so
Ghost.
sorry.
You're
Fire
fine.
Ghost.
I will head it off with a Fire Ghost, and then Courtland will freeze. The episode opens with a close-up, heated argument between Sam and Kiki. Gary interjects briefly, then we cut to Betty Ann explaining the situation from the sidelines next to Frank. Apparently, Kiki loaned Sam her favorite sweater, and her locker got broken into. Sam tries to apologize, but her angry words are of no effect. The bickering escalates more and more, adding more fuel to the fire when Tucker runs in, trips, and drops the fire bucket full of water on the ground.
Okay, bucket boy.
Gary begins squabbling with Tucker over his mistake, and Betty Ann breaks up the fighting with a loud whistle. Tucker takes his place on the stone throne to describe the nature of fire. When given a chance, it can cause horrible destruction. I'm not talking about the damage it can do while it's burning. I'm talking about the damage it can do after it's been put out. He throws his midnight dust on the fire, and with a blaze of flashing smoke, introduces his tale. We open the tale with a couple of people hidden in the shadows grabbing a box of matches from a drawer. Upstairs, a fireman rests on his bed when the alarm goes off. He runs to the fire pole and slides down only to witness his friends, family, and co-workers and put together a surprise party. When the group enjoys the birthday cake, Jimmy's mother hurries out of the scene to go to the hospital after her pager beeps. Yay 90s. Meanwhile, the fireman's daughter, Roxy, gives him a nose ring for his birthday. So thoughtful. Just then, the lights flicker, and Roxy questions what the fire ghost is about. The window Jimmy is sitting nearby shatters, and Jimmy gets shards of glass in his hand. Jimmy's dad patches it up in the equipment room, but clearly Jimmy is upset at his dad for missing dozens of his activities. Jimmy's dad apologizes for being tied up in work, and he promises to spend some quality time with his son by playing video games in the rec room in just a few moments. Their fun is smothered by yet another sudden fire alarm. As predicted, Jimmy's dad leaves with his group to save the day. Jimmy leers at his dad while his father shouts a false promise at him, and Roxy tries to call for their mother, but the phone dies. The lights continue to flicker, and the two feel increasingly uncomfortable being left behind alone in the fire station. The kids witness a man fly down the fire pole in the darkness. He approaches Roxy and Jimmy, lighting a match under his face to reveal himself as Jake Griffin, one of the firemen who stayed behind during the call. Over at the birthday table, Jake describes the devious nature of fire.
It lives, it dies, and it thinks. Fire will do anything to survive and grow.
Once a fire is quote-unquote dead, the spirit of the flame allegedly follows firefighters back to their station to haunt them via a victim looking directly into the flame. Jake mentions Jimmy's dad is aware of the fire ghost haunting this station, and to be careful, should they encounter it. Back upstairs, the siblings chill on the cots while Jimmy asks her, whose fault is it that their parents broke up? Roxy extinguishes that conversation quickly, knowing they've been down this road before. Shortly after, we see and hear a warm light flickering from below the fire pole. Jimmy slides down to investigate with a candlestick. No one is around, but the light heats up inside the equipment room, drawing Jimmy closer. Roxy creeps up on Jimmy, and the flickering shuts down instantly. The phone rings, and the kids can hear a man taunting them on the line. A fire hose sneaks up from behind Jimmy like a cobra, wraps around him, then drags him into the equipment room. A fireman's suit comes to life and enters the room, axing the hose. Terrified, Roxy and Jimmy race through the upper level of the fire station to seek refuge from their masked assailant. The assailant spots the kids hiding behind a curtain. Turns out it's Jake, watching out for them. The kids demand, how come you know so much about ghosts? To which Jake calmly replies,
Takes one to know one.
The kids smash a window to escape, leading them to a police officer patrolling the area. The officer searches the area for any culprits with the kids. No one is around. The officer orders the kids to stay locked up in the equipment room while he searches the interior premises. The kids refuse, stammering that it's dangerous in there. Irritated, the officer grabs Roxy by the shoulder, revealing his true form as the fire ghost. He laughs maniacally while a flame bursts behind them, then vanishes. A moment later, the kids reunite with Jake to learn how to defeat the spirit they had released into the firehouse. Jake explains the origins of the fire ghost and how he looked inside of a crumbling building for more people but ended up perishing. The fire that took Jake's life is the same one that this fire ghost came from, and also the same fire Jimmy and Roxy's father helped extinguish. Now it's back to seek revenge, and the three devise a plan to stop the wandering flame before the other firefighters return. Crossfade to Jimmy approaching the equipment room, antagonizing the fire ghost to come out and attack him. The fire ghost falls for the bait, blaming Jimmy's father as a murderer. Roxy creeps up behind the ghost and blasts him with a fire extinguisher. However, their victory is a short-lived one, as Jake's speech is cut off by the ghost, re-emerging to hassle Jake and the kids. Jimmy pleads with the ghost,
I hate fire. Do anything, but please don't use fire.
but the ghost, intrigued by the kid's vulnerability, ignites himself while in human form, triggering the sprinkler system above. The fire ghost melts, wailing a horrible screech, reducing itself to dust, while Jimmy stomps the dust with his foot. Now at peace, Jake tells the kids to mention him to their father and vanishes for the final time. The firemen return on their fire truck, and the kids are thrilled to see their father safe and sound. The father asks what happened here, and they embrace their father in a loving hug. We return to the Midnight Society campfire pit, where Frank praises Tucker for a well-woven ghost story, which is a first. Sam approaches Kiki and offers to pay for her stolen sweater, but Kiki agrees they'll each pay for half to replace it. Frank teases the girls for making up with each other, and the three walk off into the woods, Betty Ann trailing behind. Gary asks his sibling what to do now that all the water's been spilt, and Tucker reassures him they'll just put dirt on the fire instead. The remaining storytellers leave for the night, and as the camera settles on the campfire pit, smoke spurts out of the pile alongside unnerving guttural music. End of the episode.
Okay, Courtland, you are representing the frozen ghost, so it is your turn.
All right, well, let's get with the story for the Frozen Ghost. So, this episode opens up with everyone around the Midnight Society campfire trying to stay cool on a hot summer night while they wait for Kristen to arrive. Some of them are fanning themselves, while others are imagining swimming in a pool. Kristen appears at the campfire pit dressed in denim from head to toe, stating her wardrobe, as usual, ties into her story, and mentions how she has a tale so chilling it'll send shivers down everybody's spine. The others gawk in amazement. Kristen throws a handful of midnight dust into the campfire, declaring her story title, The Tale of the Frozen Ghost. The story begins one chilly January night as a limo speeds down a dark road past iced over trees. Inside, there's Charles Pemberton III, who's a rich kid bundled up tightly, like tighter than a coiled snake, and Daphne, his couldn't care less babysitter, imagining what it'll be like to meet Charles's aunts, who live in the countryside alone. The limo arrives at a large, well-preserved farmhouse where the driver drops off the kids. The two cautiously step onto the porch where Charles gets a tad shaken by a rocking chair being pushed back and forth by the winter breeze. The doors open up to reveal two charming elderly women, Greta and Maylene, who cheerfully invite the kids into their home and take their bags. One of them look outside the door cautiously before closing it, and the driver scurries out the front door, creeped out by the house. While both aunts lug their guests' trunk upstairs to their rooms, Maylene slips a tip that their country abode may be haunted by ghosts.
We're only trying to be good hosts.
I thought we agreed not to mention that.
I only said hosts, not ghosts. Ghosts?
Charles examines his bedroom while Daphne leaves to draw his bath. He hears a sudden noise, jumping to the conclusion that it could be a ghost. In the next scene, Charles slinks into his bubble bath after noticing some strange occurrences within the bathroom. There's overhead lights that are swinging, there's whispering, dancing around the walls. Spooky stuff. Downstairs, the aunts argue over a lack of heat in the house due to their electric bill being late. They lead into a story about how their father raised his daughters with specific money beliefs, and a falling out happened between him and Charles's great-grandfather. Apparently, Uncle Charlie hired a convicted bank robber to work on the farm, and some shady business went down. According to Maylene, everyone on the train out of the town, including the arrested robber, crashed, and they never found his body. Outside, we see a strange point of view angle of something floating into the kitchen window, and it pushes the pie off the sill with a sudden gust of wind. Maylene continues the story now that Charles is dressed and eating dinner, and Daphne prods the aunts to hear more about the rumored stories about ghosts living around the house. But they kind of continue to dance around the subject, leaving out some critical elements. Later that night, while Charles is fast asleep, he dreams of a strange scenario where we see the robber reach into a hollowed log and rip out something red from Charles, shouting, "Give it back, kid, give it back." Charlie suddenly wakes up to witness his bedroom window burst open. He walks over and sees a small ghost child glowing in the dark of night, timidly uttering, Mortified, Charles runs out of his bedroom to get Daphne's help, but she's not having any of his nonsense, and she slams that door right in his face. The next morning, the kids argue whether or not what Charles spotted was actually there. Maylene mentions, "Well, it never talked to us," and the aunts drop the charade and admit that they're aware of the ghost haunting their property. Maylene drops her cross-stitch hoop, showing a rather bloody axe, I might add, to explain how a little boy from the neighboring farm used to sneak around the house all the time, looking for where his mother hid the cookies. The child, unfortunately, froze to death. And they found his...
Don't you hate when that happens?
I'm just sitting here laughing about it.
Oh, darn.
Is that bad? No. It's just kind of sad.
But they found the body of them huddled up for warmth under the woodshed. Aunt Greta interrupts to announce the fire in the stove has gone out again, and they need the kids to chop up some more wood so that they can keep the house warm. Charles and Daphne sauntered to the backyard to prepare to chop some logs. Charles here, he's hesitant though, giving excuse after really lame excuse about not being able to do things, proving just how sheltered he is. Fed up with Charles's hesitant nature, Daphne scoops up a mound of mud and slathers it all over his clean blue flannel overalls. Charles tries to scrape off the mud, whining the entire time. Suddenly, the bickering duo are cut off by a trailing whisper. They look out at the edge of the property, but nothing's there. Daphne disappears in a search to find the source, while Charles cowers in the woodshed. Just then, a pair of small footprints imprint themselves in a stepping fashion through the mud towards Charles. The camera whips around to reveal the pale white ghost repeating his iconic line. It's in all the commercials. Frightened, Charles hobbles and jumps through the brush, running into the ghost at every turn. Suddenly, he gets stuck in a deep mud puddle and falls over. Twice for some reason. I don't know. They really like that shot. And Daphne reappears to pick him up. The ghost reappears before both kids, and Daphne questions what the ghost wants. Charles, who's now oddly calm and composed, he realizes that his dream is connected to the apparent adolescent, the child. The ghost points to a nearby log, and Charles pulls out his red coat, dropping the stove's flue key in the process. In a beatific camera swish, the ghost puts on his red jacket and transforms into his vibrant, cheerful self. In an instant, he smiles and then vanishes from sight. Daphne and Charles smile, knowing that they got gratification from helping out the ghost complete his unfinished business. They pick up the stovepipe key, prompting Maylene to reinsert it into the stove back at the farmhouse. A sudden rush of metal clings and clangs through the flue, unloading a whole lot of gold that the criminal kept secret all this time. While Charles holds a pile of newly found fortune, Daphne declares,
Maylene, Greta, I have a feeling your money troubles are over.
We crossfade back to the Midnight Society's campfire, where the storytellers piece together the story's elements, all satisfied with Kristen's tale. Gary grabs the fire bucket, declaring this meeting of the Heatwave Society over, and they all exit the campfire pit into the night as the smoke rises into the moonlight sky. And that's the end of the episode.
Thank you, Courtland. Having heard a recap of both of the episodes, I have a question for the both of you. One thing I always think of when I watch a Are You Afraid of the Dark episode is obviously each of the Midnight Society members gets to tell a story. So for the Frozen Ghost, that was a Kristen story, and the Fire Ghost was a Tucker story. The thing these two characters have in common is they are very controversial. So my question for you first, Courtland, is do you think that Kristen was the appropriate Midnight Society member to tell a story like Frozen Ghost?
I feel like Kristen's stories are a little bit more whimsical and lighthearted in nature, and I think the Frozen Ghost is pretty lighthearted. I mean, it ultimately has like a pretty satisfying conclusion, which besides like the Tale of the Final Wish, I think all of us have had like a really nice satisfying conclusion where everybody's happy in the end of the day. I mean, all the money problems are fixed, the ghost's unfinished business is completed. The ghost robber, he doesn't get nothing, but he caused all this problem in the first place. But I think it is. I think it's a little bit. I don't think this episode's scary, but I think this is a little bit more on the spooky side for a Kristen tale when you compare it to something like The Hungry Hounds or Locker 22. But I'm glad that she got to have this story, and I think Kristen has some really great moments at the beginning too. So yeah, I'm glad this one's a Kristen story. It doesn't really fit into her theme of like dressing. I guess they tried to go with like her being in full 1991 denim at the time, but like other than that, yeah, I think it was a good Kristen story.
What about you, Alex? Our lovable scamp, Tucker, in his younger version, not the new wave of the Midnight Society. He's the one who told the tale of the Fire Ghost. Do you think, based on some of the previous stories, like the Midnight Ride and the Phone Police, that this is something that fits in with Tucker's oeuvre?
I think so. If you really look at his stories as a whole, they really deal a lot with some pretty extreme, I want to say elemental, that's not the word, supernatural elements, because you do have the headless ghost. The phone police themselves are very much a mystery that even now we still don't know how they operate. And then later we have things like the Forever Game, and that we also have Jake the Snake, Tale of Oblivion, and even on the original series, the Manaha, Guardian's Curse. He deals a lot with very supernatural monsters in some form. And while a lot of Are You Afraid of the Dark tales do deal with ghosts, it is a pretty common thing to occur. There is an elemental element added to this, because it's not just your usual ghost. It actually poses a real physical threat to the kids, which we'll talk about more that later. But it's giving an extra bit of flavor for a Tucker tale where there are genuine stakes and involved that we don't normally get from his tales. I mean, there are stakes involved, but the supernatural elements that are involved in them feel less imposing because fire, that is combining a natural element and a supernatural element together and makes for an interesting concept, which Tucker, for his many faults, does come up with some pretty creative big bads for his tales.
I like that, and I like what you said about the elemental element and the supernatural element. Because if you take both ghosts away from each episode, you still have cold, extreme cold, and extreme heat, and those are deadly on their own. And I love episodes where you have the supernatural element and it's cool and everything, but there's still some real danger there if you take those away. Now, speaking of our kids, are we ready to move on to category number 2?
Yes.
Awesome. Category number 2, this is where we talk about our main character duos. So we have for Frozen Ghosts, Daphne and Charles Pemberton the third. And then for Fire Ghosts, we have Roxy and Jimmy. So this time, I'm going to start with you, Courtland. Would you like to break down your two characters of Daphne and Charles Pemberton the third?
I would love to talk about Daphne and Charles Pemberton the third. I like these characters quite a bit just because they're so fire and ice. I know, right? Let's see what I did there. I just really like it because they are very different. You have Charles, which is very like posh. If I'm using that word right, I'm not.
Yeah.
He's very much like spoiled and overbearing and scared of everything. I mean, I don't know how many times this kid stammered out ghosts in this episode, but it was a lot.
Ghosts? Ghost? Ghost? Ghosts? The ghost! The ghost. Ghosts? Ghosts?
And I just love their back and forth. You have Melissa Joan Hart as Daphne. I mean, Nickelodeon, Melissa Joan Hart was like kind of the face of Nickelodeon for a little while there. She was in Clarissa Explains It All, and then they were like, we got her for Are You Afraid of the Dark? Everybody needs to watch this episode. And you can tell because, I mean, I made a joke about it earlier, but it was in all the commercials.
And you'll also get The Tale of the Frozen Ghost, featuring Melissa Joan Hart as a babysitter who joins a young boy in uncovering a spooky secret.
The music video, Feel the Fear, there's a lot of Frozen Ghost in there. I think it really drew a lot of viewers for Are You Afraid of the Dark that liked Clarissa and maybe hadn't seen Are You Afraid of the Dark somehow. I don't know. But they had her and they used her for a lot of their commercials. But yeah, I love the characters so much. It's probably my favorite part about The Tale of the Frozen Ghost. The ants alone. I mean, I'm pretty sure I could quote those ants all day and I would love myself if I did that. So just the way that they make mac and cheese and pie, like I wish they were my grandmas, but Daphne and Charles, I mean, they have some chemistry going on, and you just watching Daphne be so annoyed with Charles as we the viewers are annoyed with Charles.
Oh look, he's still alive. What a surprise. He survived a little bit of mud.
It's such a fun journey to kind of go through for 22 minutes.
Was Melissa Joan Hart appropriate for this role as Daphne the babysitter?
I think she was. I think Melissa Joan Hart was in kind of this child actor. She was like in a higher tier echelon of child actors. She has quite a range. She's very talented and dependable, and I think she nailed the role. I watched a lot of Clarissa Explains It All growing up, but I don't remember as much. For some reason with Nickelodeon shows, if they didn't have kids that were my age in it, I didn't really care as much about them. Like Pete and Pete, I kind of missed out on that growing up, and now I have watched episodes and really enjoy it. Same with Clarissa Explains It All. Basically, if anybody was a high school student or like that age in Are You Afraid of the Dark, I kind of tune those episodes out. Um, I don't know, I'm weird because I know a lot. Like when you were talking about the prom queen, my first thought was like, man, I remember when I was a kid, I didn't pay attention to that one much, and I think it's because the kids were a little older, and I wanted to see kids that were more around like that, 8 through 12 age kind of thing. But anyway, yeah, I think having Melissa Joan Hart on was like a really solid choice for Nickelodeon. And I'm glad that she got to work with like DJ McHale and the crew for Are You Afraid of the Dark, because from what I've heard, it was a really wonderful experience for all the kids, which unfortunately you don't hear that a lot like these days. So I'm glad that she got to have that opportunity.
I do have one more question for you, Courtland, and I just thought of it. Is Charles Pemberton III really that bad? I know he gets a lot of a bad rap amongst the fandom as just being like this spoiled little rich boy, but is he really that bad?
I don't think he's that bad. I think he is charming, and he's the like. I know I said you can watch Melissa Joan Hart like get annoyed with him as we did as the audience. It's annoying, but Are You Afraid of the Dark has much worse characters.
Mm-hmm.
I fully stand behind the fact that Sam from The Tale of the Crimson Clown is the true villain of Are You Afraid of the Dark.
I was just thinking about him.
So no, I don't think Charles is that bad. I think he's quite likable. His apprehensions are a little bit annoying, but like you get to watch him evolve, which is kind of the most satisfying thing about Tale of the Frozen Ghost, is watching him get over his fears and do things. I mean, ultimately, he's the one that kind of solves the mystery.
I mean, he is your typical spoiled rich kid, and he is essentially served a lesson through multiple characters, not just the ghost. A big part of it being from his babysitter.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not terrible. He's not exceedingly unlikable. He starts off arrogant, but slowly evolves, which, I mean, you've usually have to have. It's kind of an Are You Afraid of the Dark trope. You have to have at least one somewhat unlikable character for all these horrible things to be happening to them. It's not always the case, but often the case.
Okay, Alex, what about our two Fire Ghost protagonists? We have teenage Roxy and her little brother Jimmy.
So this is a trope that we see a lot, especially in kids programming, kids movies. A hook is one that comes to mind immediately, and I know there are many more examples, but that's my go-to with the busy dad, who constantly misses his kids anything.
The soccer game.
The soccer game, yeah, and it was it a soccer game for this episode as well? It was a soccer game for this one because it was baseball. It was baseball and hook. But yeah, and Jimmy was just irritated and frustrated while being an adult. It's, come on, your dad's a freaking firefighter, man. I mean, he kind of has to go when he has to go, but at the same time, what kid wouldn't be annoyed? Maybe not necessarily at dad, but more at the situation. But that's got to be a very aware child, because at that point in time for kids, their world is very self-centered. Not every child, but every kid has a bit of selfishness. Every adult has a bit of selfishness. And especially whenever you love someone and you want to be with them and they're constantly busy having to do something, you get irritated and might even take out some of that on them, and it's super easy to do when you're a kid, which is something that I think a lot of adults can take for granted whenever they're watching this episode and they just want to shake Jimmy like, dude, your dad's a freaking firefighter. Like, the kid's a kid. Come on. He's not seen his dad, and his dad's missed out on so much of his special events. And although as a father I can totally relate and understand where the dad is coming from, but also having been a child, I can understand where Jimmy's coming from. And Jimmy is kind of in the same boat as Charles. He's a bit of that snooty, arrogant personality. He's not uppity rich, but he's that, I'm frustrated, I'm annoyed, and I want everyone to know it, and everyone's going to know it. but also he's pretty inventive and thinks on his feet pretty well, because it was his idea that actually defeated the ghost, which I'll get to that a little more. I'm not going to get too much into that right here, but it was his idea. He is the ultimate one who came up with the idea that did stop the ghost, uh, under a lot of pressure, because that's a really intimidating figure, to go up against a kid. And Roxy also is very um, adept at coming up with ideas, and she actually made the first attempt to defeat the ghost, which failed, but it was still a good idea. And she also stands her ground, because I think it was her who did not want to go into the equipment room. I mean, the both of them didn't, but she was the more vocal of the two, and really standing up to what they thought at the time a police officer. And they didn't know it was the main villain. They just thought it was a normal cop. And that she's standing her ground. No, I don't want to do that. And that takes a lot of guts for any child to stand up to an adult, let alone a police officer, which is a big deal. But also, the two of them really did have a good. I really felt like they were brother and sister, because they didn't, like most Are You Afraid of the Dark siblings, they're often at each other's throats throughout much of the episode, like most siblings. This one really isn't that way. They do bicker, they do argue a little bit, but it's a little bit. And then most of the time, they're really working together given the environment that they're in. And I really like that, because that's what you see a lot with siblings. They do argue, they do play, they do interact, but whenever there is something that they need to stop all this and really focus on their situation, they will. Um, which I've seen a lot of, unfortunately, but it happens. And given the situation, they work well together. They work even, I would say, even better as individuals, but they both carry out their plans well, and they're both very intelligent children.
I fully agree with you. I quite like Jimmy and Roxy. I think they were really well casted characters.
Mhm.
Like the actor and actresses that played them were great, and I like the stories where the brother and sister kind of get along and they
Hmm.
work together to solve a problem.
Not like the Phantom Cab, where the kid's trying to solve it in the back seat,
Yeah,
and the other one's just berating him the entire time. Like, shut up! He's trying to figure this. You're gonna die. Shut up.
yeah. Phantom Cab is a great example of like bad
Yeah,
siblings.
yeah.
Or I mean, I hate to bring up like Crimson Cloud again, but I mean that brother
Great episode.
brother. I love the episode. There's so much to enjoy about it. But like that brother brother relationship is really strained, and you can tell. This one doesn't quite have that. Like they have their own problems. Their mom and dad are separated, and it's just really again, it's kind of one of those things you can relate to it, and that's one of the wonderful things about Are You Afraid of the Dark, is that they did have characters that you can relate to, and you can see that they can be brave in scary situations. And Fire Ghost is definitely one of those like kid empowering episodes.
You guys, I this may be a tangent, but I just thought of something. This poor actress has been in two separate episodes where her dad is emotionally unavailable. I just realized she was in The Guardian's Curse, as Danny Cooksey's sister, and that dad had was too busy to take them on a ski trip. So they should bring her back and give her a more
Like,
attentive father figure.
no, they'll bring her back in a reboot, and the husband will be gone.
Exactly. That's the Are You Afraid of the Dark way. But Alex, the question I had for you, and I really credit you, Courtland, for kind of, making me think of this. Courtland, you mentioned evolution. Charles Pemberton the third, he comes into the episode a very specific type of person, and through the ordeal of having to figure out what this ghost is needing, he kind of ends the episode a braver, less self-centered individual. Do you think, Alex, that from point A to point B, Roxy and Jimmy had any kind of evolution as characters?
Most definitely. I don't think Roxy necessarily, because Roxy has been far more supportive of her father being a firefighter and understanding of the situation. I think Roxy has just been frustrated with the situation whenever something would happen. She was never really resentful towards her father, but also she's older and she understands things more, whereas Jimmy is younger and not fully aware of the situation. And again, the your dad's a firefighter. He knows his dad is a firefighter. I know what my dad does,
Mhm.
but he doesn't know what all is involved with being a firefighter and the risks that's being taken every single time he goes out. I mean, yes, he knows that they're emergency services. I mean, he knows the basic stuff, but never really taken into account the full gravitas that comes with actually having to do his profession, which he begins to understand more as he's having to face this ghost and realizing not only what the fire ghost has gone through and how he blames the dad, which, okay, a ghost can show up, a fire ghost by this lore can show up through looking into a fire that's been put out and then now it's haunting, but also the fact that Jake was a former firefighter and passed while helping the father, and that was what made Jimmy begin to realize the real stakes that are involved, not necessarily the fire ghost, but the fact that he has another firefighter who passed as a result of all this, and this could have been my dad. And now, when dad shows up again at the end, his attitude has completely changed. Not necessarily because he's had to fight a ghost, but dad's back. Because he was already relieved by this point. Like, oh, okay, the ghost is done. Okay, we just gotta wait for dad to be home, be back, and dad shows up. And he's just happy that his dad's okay. And honestly proud of his dad because of the way that Jake had built his father up throughout the episode and has far more of a deeper understanding and appreciation for his dad, even though his dad hasn't been able to be there and probably won't be
Mhm.
there as often as he would like. At least now he understands more and is more patient. I would imagine would be more patient about his father having to go out and help people.
Okay, our third category is ghost character. So this time, Alex, I'm going to start with you. You are representing our fire ghost. Tell us a little bit about that character.
Well, we do have two ghosts in this story, but I mean, technically we do. But the main antagonist is the fire ghost, and it's a bit convoluted the way they bring this in, but it reminded me of Backdraft, the 1991 movie with Kurt Russell, because Donald Sutherland in that movie, he would talk about how the fire was a living thing,
Mhm.
stupid, crazy little arsonist.
Did it look at you? Did the fire look at you?
In a way, you can kind of understand where a person would come think that, because if you've never really seen a really roaring fire, it's freaking terrifying. And if you combine that with a ghost, when a ghost can already be terrifying, it's amplified. So yeah, the way that a fire ghost can come to be is a bit far-fetched, but honestly, it's Are You Afraid of the Dark? We've had werewolves and pinball machines that swallow children. If you're having a hard time believing a fire ghost, you're in the wrong anthology series. I'm sorry. Uh, but I do kind of like that there is a bit of intrigue and mystery behind what is the fire ghost. I mean, yes, it's a ghost that is a fire is a living thing, and when it's put out, it begins to haunt the firemen for defeating it. I do kind of like that. How it comes to be, I don't know. Does that happen with every single fire that's ever been put out, and do they follow every single fireman? I don't know. Is there is there a certain degree, like, do kids have tiny little ghosts that follow them whenever they put out their birthday candles? I mean, I don't know, but and that's really nitpicking. That I feel like those guys on Gremlins 2 who are nitpicking if they eat after midnight and then they go to a different time zone. It's really nitpicky stuff, but we don't need to go into all that. It's just an interesting concept and one that we don't really need to go into a whole lot for a one-off episode, but it is an interesting idea. And while I don't necessarily care for the way they executed the way the ghost was defeated, this is a kids show. And what do kids want to see them do? See other kids do on a show. They want to see them outsmart, outwit the main villain. While the acting from Jimmy was not the best in that scene. No, don't turn to fire.
Anything but fire.
Anything but fire. Like, okay, no, dude, sell this. I'm not. I would see through that. I mean, every one of us adults would look through this scene and go, yeah, no, I see what you're doing. But again, kids show, kids anthology series, and as a kid, I wouldn't have thought this kid was acting terribly. Do you know how many things I've seen as a kid and was like, oh, this is awesome, and I go back and watch it as an adult, I'm like, what was I thinking when I was 8 years old? I mean, I can totally see kids getting into how this kid was yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. I mean, my son, 9 years old, is watching Home Alone, and then will come over and tell me, so if a burglar ever came in, you know what I would tell him? Stop. Sam, are you serious? Good luck with that. We think some dumb things when we're 8 and 9 years old, but it's still, if done well, I mean, if performed well, I could really see something like this, a ghost falling for a dumb ploy like this, but you really need a good performer to convincingly do that. But it's possible. Yeah. I mean, we've even seen other movies and TV shows where adults have done this kind of thing, but it's been more believable in those situations. So while I don't necessarily care for the way they handled the execution of the fire ghost, it's also a kids show, and they got to wrap it up quick and do it in a way that will appeal to kids. And for the way they handled it, it's, for an adult, it's serviceable. For a kid, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, Jimmy invented reverse psychology. I can't believe it. You know?
Alex, you mentioned the age of your son, and it just reminded me that really this show's probably primary demographic was as early as 7 on up to middle school age. And with this particular episode, and even with Frozen Ghosts, our ghost characters had fairly traumatic things that happened to them that resulted in their death. Do you think this fireman perishing in a fire while fighting a fire, do you think that's particularly heavy for that age demographic?
Is it heavy? It probably is. But to be perfectly honest, kids are capable of handling very, very heavy concepts. And Sam, my oldest, he has taken to heavy concepts very, very quickly and is okay with talking about them and learning from them and how it affects other people. A quick example was one time we had a babysitter come out, take him to the museum. She's become like a sister, like an aunt to him, but she has a lot of anxieties, especially in large groups of people. And she took him to the museum, kids museum, and she had to set aside. It was beginning to get to her, all these people, and she let her husband take my son to go play. But he's fine playing with her husband, but he also wanted to spend time with her, so he goes to check on her because that's the way he is. And she was telling, no, I'm fine. I'm not okay. I will be. Go. So he didn't question. He went and he played, and then he came back after about 15 minutes to check on her again. And she said, no, I can't right now. And he said, why? And she tries to explain this dumbed down about how she gets anxieties. And then he said, so, and he got it immediately. So all these people are making you freak out right now.
Mm-hmm.
And she went, yes. He said, what can we do to help?
Mm-hmm.
At 9, he understood massive adult issues and mental health awareness at 9. Or no, he wasn't 9, he was 7 at the time. So kids can totally understand heavy concepts. I mean, kids go to children's church and learn about heaven and hell and the eternity. They might not be able to grasp the whole concept. I mean, adults can't really sometimes grasp the whole concept, but kids are absolutely able to take heavy, traumatic concepts in television and movies and all these other things, and really, I mean, you had an existential crisis whenever you watched the prom queen, because you weren't really worried about the ghost. You were worried about this could happen to me. This could happen to anyone. And while it can be frightening to some, it can be eye-opening to anyone. And no, is it something that kids can watch and understand? Yes. Is it something that should and shouldn't be? That's very case by case basis. How is the child? Can they handle these kind of concepts? Is it in a household where the parents can explain these things in a way that children can understand? I mean, it's very case by case, but for the most part, kids are far more stronger and adaptable than what adults think they can.
You know what? I'm glad you said that because I was just thinking that I really appreciate that the show went there because we've, over the lifetime of the show, we've had characters that are hard of hearing. We've had characters who are disabled, and we even had, characters dealing with divorce or a parent passing away. And that was just so subtly written into these episodes that, like, it's there, but they don't dwell on it so much. But kids can identify. They're like, well, my parents are divorced, or my dad just passed away last year. I understand what that's like. So I really appreciate you saying that because I think that's the beauty of this show is that if you take away the horror element, like real life sometimes can be scary on its own without ghosts and. And werewolves.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think that was a conscious effort, if I remember correctly, that DJ had said where, yes, the ghost is the main ploy, but what is the kids' stories?
That's what I love about the show so much is that it really respects children the entire time. And I think that's awesome.
Well, Courtland, you're up next. We're going to move away from fire and back to ice. So you have the frozen ghost.
I do want to say for Fire Ghost, when I was a child, I remember specifically being in some sort of store. I think it was like an antique store, and I looked into a fireplace and was like, "Uh-oh, we get the fire ghost." It reminded me of that when you were like, "Oh, when a kid blows out a candle, is that summon a fire ghost?" I don't know. It's funny though because when I did this episode on the podcast, I didn't really remember a lot of it, but I specifically remember looking into fire and being worried for a little bit. There's a fire ghost coming out. So
you were worried about fire ghosts, and I was worried about getting mowed down by a car on prom night.
yeah. Yep. So Tale of the Frozen Ghost, the ghost in this episode, it kind of falls in the category of like not being a villain, which I quite like that. I like those Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes where there's not really like a quantified villain. The one that I always use as an example because it's really popular is the Tale of the Dollmaker. Like the dollmaker itself is kind of the villain of that episode, and there's not like a adult that they have to deal with or goth or something. Like it's just the situation, and it's kind of the same a little bit in Frozen Ghost. The ghost itself is honestly just more annoying than it is threatening by any means. If they did want to go a threatening route, they could have had the bank robber be a ghost as well, kind of like what they did with Jake. Like if they had two ghosts like they did in Fire Ghost, having the villain be that bank robber, but they focus more on like the child and getting him warmed up so that he can move on to the other side. We did get like the nice backstory of the ghost, which I think was kind of a little bit lacking in Fire Ghost in a way, just because like the Fire Ghost it was not like a human that died in the fire. It was literally the ghost of that fire. So having it have like a corporeal, like human form was a good choice because I love the makeup and everything, but it makes a little bit more sense in the Frozen Ghost where it's like literally that child that passed away. But like I said, he's just a little bit annoying. He's always talk about how cold he is.
Feels like Frosty the Snowman is sitting on my face.
He just kind of moves stuff. Like even Maylene and Greta are just like, yeah, he's just kind of annoying. We just deal with it. Like he's fine, you know. I don't know if he has some sort of like psychic abilities to instill like the images in Charles's dreams. Maybe there's a layer to the Frozen Ghost that nobody knows about because all he says is that I'm cold, you know. Like, he doesn't say anything else. But it is very satisfying to see his story come to a full conclusion. But again, you get that with Jake and the Fire Ghost too. One thing, I don't know if this is the right time to mention it or not, but I love in Fire Ghost how the kids have no idea about Jake, even though there is a plaque like commemorating Jake and his service to the fire department, like in there, which I feel like they spend a lot of time in the firehouse and they're just like, who's this Jake fella? Like nobody's ever talked about him.
Where did this guy come from? I've been here so many times and he's never been here before.
My dad never mentioned anything about Jake. I don't know where he is.
It's kind of almost very similar to The Quiet Librarian, where the librarian's portrait apparently has been hanging in the library, and it's like the characters are like seeing her for the very first time when they encounter her.
I love it. I love that stuff. I think it's so funny.
I gotta say, I resonate with that stupid ghost, because I absolutely hate with a passion cold. And every single time especially this time of year, I step outside, I instantly think that stupid kid, I'm cold.
I mean, look, guys, I'm cold right now. So like he's been rolling through my mind rent free for like 2 months at minimum.
And see, my son, he's 3, and every single time he gets out of the bathtub and I start to dry him off, and he will say, I'm cold. And it sounds like the frickin' Frozen Ghost, the way he says it. And he's never watched the show before. But mine is as far more PC than his is. Mine, I'm not going to say because we usually keep the show about PG-13. But if you want to know my opinion on cold, just look up Cowboy Junkies and their song about cold. That's exactly how I feel about cold.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, the fact, because my question for you, Courtland, is with both our ghosts, Jake and this unnamed child, Jake gets to have full-blown conversations with Roxy and Jimmy. Meanwhile, Daphne and Charles are trying to solve the mystery, and they have this ghost that's just saying the same thing over and over again. So what is your headcanon, your ghost headcanon for why the child ghost is only able to have very limited communication versus, someone like Jake who is able to freely communicate with the people he's haunting?
I will say, I think that's a great question. There's a lot of ghost stories in Are You Afraid of the Dark, and they are all very inconsistent with how the ghosts are presented, what they're able to do. I don't know what Kristen's cooking up with this one, because I just imagined her by the fire being like, and all he said was, I'm cold. Like, and everybody's just like,
It's like the where's my big toe? It just says that over and over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's like, I mean, speaking of that, isn't that from like Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark? There's like a couple of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark that are all the same of like, where's my this,
Let's shift over to our fourth category. Because the theme of this episode is elements, I'm going to be asking you about the particular element utilized in your stories. Courtland, I think I'll start with you this time. You are dealing with the element of ice. How well is ice represented in the Frozen Ghost?
So I remember when I covered this episode on the podcast, 20 years ago. The element of ice for something called the Tale of the Frozen Ghost, it's not. I feel like it's not that cold. I don't know if it's just me. It's a January day or
It's
night,
like in the
and it's
30s or 40s outside. You could have a light jacket.
yeah. It's like Daphne and Charles. They didn't look very bundled up to me. The ground is not that frozen. The scenery, it could have been a little more frozen. We see, like, the first time I remember really seeing something Frozen-esque for a show that was shot in Canada, was the Tale of Oblivion, because they're like trudging through like snow, and then you have the Tale of Bigfoot's Ridge. So those ones are very much more frozen than Frozen Ghost. It does have that element of like, oh, our power's out, like it's so cold in here, but I'm gonna bake a pie. It's not, besides him constantly letting us know that he's cold, you guys. There's not that much frozenness in this episode.
Yeah. I will say that opening scene of the limo driving, that's the coldest it felt in that episode. And then to me, if it's really that cold and they don't have heat, to me, the worst thing you could do is take a bath. I don't know about you all, but like if the power goes out in my house in this winter time, the last thing I want to do is go submerge myself in a body of water. So I like that you pointed that out, Courtland, because I never thought about that. What about you, Alex? Your element is fire. Do you think the Fire Ghost episode represented your particular element well?
It did. Going along with being hot. Over in Frozen Ghost, the episode opened with them all sweltering, and then meanwhile there's Kristen there with a sweater, and everyone's going, how is she okay with this? That's me. In my 99-degree interior of my car where you can't breathe when you step in, I'm the one going, this is fine. This is good. I'm happy. I'm in my happy place. My wife thinks I'm insane. But I do feel that they really did do well with the fire element within this episode. I mean, you're at a fire station, so you have all the elements of being a firefighter. It's hard to really plan much of anything because you never know when you're going to be called out on a whim, but to help, obviously, put out a fire. But also, you do have fire within the episode. Little bursts of fire on occasion to frighten the children. There would be a fire that would slowly roar in the equipment room. The ghost itself was made of fire. I think they even had, correct me if I'm wrong, I know they had it for night shift, but it looked like they had a stuntman. I mean, they did have digital fire, but I think they actually did have a stuntman who was on fire at one point in the episode. And fire was defeated twice. Well, the one fake out and one real by being put out by an extinguisher or a sprinkle system. You actually had a fireman's suit that was inhabited by a ghost. So they're blowing out the candles. So you do have quite a bit of the use of fire in this episode. The fire ghost looked charred. Which I thought was a nice little touch. He wasn't at first, but once he revealed his true form, it was all black and he had red around his eyes. It was a good job, but they really utilized the fire well for the episode.
Awesome. And am I the only one with this line of thinking that I don't necessarily view the Fire Ghost as having a happy ending, because there's that lingering shot at the end of the episode, and I always used to think to myself, is it really defeated or is it still out there?
It's interesting to see that by the end of it, because I mean it's a tale, and it's so rare whenever they would have a potential real tie to the tale. I mean, yes, they've had pictures, and then they would be looking at the pictures a little awkwardly, or they would put on a mask or something that tied to the story and.
Or the Tucker doll.
Yeah. I mean, they would have something just like a prop to scare the other Midnight Society members. Mm-hmm. But this was the only time outside of Silver Sight, whenever there was a nod to the audience that there could really be, especially how many times they've looked into the fire and how many times they've put the fire out. Maybe this time, I don't know, but it's an interesting thing to ponder.
I mean, on top of that, I mean, if there's a fire ghost made every time a fire goes out, like that's a hard world them kids have to live in. Because like,
I was just thinking, poor California.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, their dad's in the most dangerous business ever. Like, haunted. Everything's haunted. Everywhere is haunted.
He's probably like, oh yeah, those are my friends. They just follow me. No biggie.
It is quite literally a ghost town.
That brings us, you guys, to our final category, lasting appeal, which I'm very excited about this category because one thing, I think we probably all have in common is for a show that came out, is it 30 years? It feels like it. 90. Yeah, it's been over 30 years that this show has been out. And I think the three of us, maybe not every day, but we return to this series quite often. So, Alex, I want you to go first. Do you think that the Fire Ghost has lasting appeal?
I definitely think the episode has a lot of lasting appeal. It is not one of the most recognized episodes within the Are You Afraid of the Dark canon. I do think it's underrated. I think it deserves more credit than it's given, which is the definition of underrated. It's not a fantastic episode. It's not in the upper echelon of some of the greats, but it's not bad. It really has some interesting concepts. There's really few things about the episode that date it, outside of maybe mom having a pager.
She could have a cell phone; it'd be fine.
Yeah, you just replace it, or update the technology, but everything else about the episode can still happen today. There are still kids that will go, especially for firemen, if their dad's there and they happen to have can go visit to celebrate a birthday. I'm sure, depending on I don't know. I'm sure there's stipulations and things, but I can't imagine why they wouldn't. And kids having to be there with their dad or be on the job with their parent while the other one has to go do something that they can't be there for. Being left alone in a situation, and especially if they're older and have to call for mom or call for a ride because they've got to leave on the quick run. And the effects are really quite good for 1995. I think it was 95. Scrolling up in my nose. I think
it's 94 for
94.
That one,
They're still really good for a kid show in 1994. The CGI fire that they had for it looks really good whenever they actually utilized it, and but most of the time it was practical effects for fire, which really does hold up better than most fire effects now. Effects wise, it looks good. Story wise, it's still good. Again, not great, but good. The characters and what they have experienced as a nice arc that kids still can relate to today, especially probably more so today because there's a lot more broken homes. And oh gosh, it is a fatherless generation out there. So seeing these kids being frustrated about their dads not being there is definitely something far more relatable now than it was in 1994. So yeah, there is some most definite lasting appeal to this episode.
And you know what? I was just thinking, we're of the generation that came through when Stop, Drop, and Roll and Smokey the Bear were very, very popular. And so it's just always been ingrained in me that fire is something that should be respected because it, as much as it can be destructive, is, also a source of, energy for us as well. So I think that's something that is universal. Which leads me to Courtland. Courtland, with the frozen ghost, you mentioned earlier that It is the episode they often tout in like commercials and things of that nature. But as far as looking back on the series overall, what do you think of the lasting appeal of that particular episode?
I don't think that the Frozen Ghost is a particularly strong episode. When we covered season 2 on our podcast, that actually ranked, I think, the lowest, maybe next to Locker 22. Sorry, Kristen. But it does have that lasting appeal because pretty much everybody knows about it. When people think of Are You Afraid of the Dark, they think of the Ghastly Grinner, they think of Zebo, they think of the Dead Man's Float zombie, and
Nosferatu coming into the
Nosferatu.
movie screen.
Yeah, and those are like high tier episodes. I mean, they're all really good. And then there's Frozen Ghost that everybody remembers because everybody remembers him saying, "I'm cold." And it was in all the commercials, so like the lasting appeal for it is just kind of there. It's kind of ingrained in fans of the show, or those people that had watched a couple of episodes kind of forgot about it and then was like, "Oh yeah, that kid was cold that one time." That aside, I don't really think it's that great of an episode, honestly. It's fun to watch. I mean, there's not an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark that I don't like, and there's things to like in this episode as well. I don't think that it has quite the inserting yourself in these characters as compared to Fire Ghost. I think that's much more relatable to kids in those situations, whether your dad's a firefighter or he works in a factory second shift and you never see him, or he's a doctor or a nurse or something.
Or lives on the other side of the country.
Exactly. Yeah. There's much more relatability in that with Jimmy. With Daphne and Charles, like the relatability it's not quite there. Like, I don't think a lot of people grew up with like a full-time babysitter that's 3 years older than you. That's kind of weird. I don't think a lot of people's parents sent them off to these family members that you've never met and you have no idea what they even look like. Like, I don't think that really happens to kids that much. So like that relatability factor is kind of gone. The story itself is a pretty stereotypical ghost story. There's nothing new, nothing really groundbreaking there. They help the person do their unfinished business, and bada bing, bada boom, the kid's not cold anymore. Yeah, I don't know. I do not go onto Twitter or Instagram and say like, "Oh, you got to watch Are You Afraid of the Dark? That Tale of the Frozen Ghost, you're going to be in love with it." I've never done that. It's always going to be Night Shift, Dead Man's Float, Midnight Madness. You know, this is not on there, but people do remember it.
I'm gonna say something potentially controversial. I'm curious to see if y'all think similarly. If you take Melissa Joan Hart out of this episode, I don't even think this episode would register in any top 10, top 20, or even top 30 list.
I was going to actually comment that very thing on my review of it when we got to it. No, I fully agree with you. If she's the one that elevates this episode to a decent tier. If you replaced her with any other performer, it would instantly lose some points.
Unless it's Tatiana Ali, because my girl is wonderful. Or maybe even Tia and Tamara. I could take Tia and Tamara in every single episode, and that would be lovely. But I agree. Melissa Joan Hart really carries this episode, which is funny because people remember the ghost for having the catchphrase of "I'm cold," where Melissa Joan Hart doesn't get any catchphrases. Dang.
Outside of "I will draw your bath, sire."
Oh, that was perfect. Yeah.
Whatever. I'll draw your bath, sire.
All right. Well, that, I believe, is going to head up all of our points and our arguments, and Bryce will give us his verdicts on which categories are taken by which episodes. But before we get to that point, we're going to get out of the elements for a bit, and we're going to get inside and get away from the fire, get away from the ice, gonna get our bodies at lukewarm temperature for a moment, and we're gonna see what all else is going on in terms of Splat Attack and what's going on in these guys' neck of the woods, and we'll be right back in just a few minutes.
Are you afraid to snick? We'll be right back after this.
Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of Splat Attack. If you are enjoying our ghost tales, please hit the like button, subscribe, comment below. Make sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything. If you are listening on a podcast app, please leave us a review. Very simple actions on your part, very big impact for us. If you can't get enough Splat Attack and you want some exclusive episodes just for you, go to our Patreon, patreon.com/splatattack, where we do have exclusive episodes, bonus content, live streams twice a month, along with a few more perks. So head over to patreon.com/splatattack to get your 90s fix exclusively for you.
Well, I have a podcast myself, Up All Night, a horror anthology podcast. It actually started as Up All Night, an Are You Afraid of the Dark podcast, but we ran out of content. So we had to, change things up. We've done all of Are You Afraid of the Dark, including the newest 3 seasons. We've done all of Goosebumps, including that newest season, as well as the movies. We are about midway through Tales from the Crypt right now, too, and we plan on my co-host Brandon and I plan on continuing that into whatever else comes next. Twilight Zone. I mean, there's so many horror anthology shows out there. You can find me at Up All Night Podcast on Instagram, at UAN Pod on Twitter or X, at Up All Night HA Podcast on YouTube, or Private Island Presents on TikTok because I couldn't change it. And then I'm Private Island C on Twitch if you want to nerd out with me.
Tune in next time, Slamsters, when we douse the fireplace and head outside to paint the wall one final time in our Season 5 overview. It's been a long road full of even more nostalgic content than we've ever done before, so you won't want to miss the recap of everything we've done during the past 6 months on this show. Plus, Brett is coming back for this episode to talk about what he has observed both as a creator and as a viewer. So, very much a changing of the guard, but it's going to be a lot of fun. So, don't miss out. Catch all the nostalgic-tastic action only here on Splat Attack.
Tremble. Cackle. Quiver. Shriek. Cringe. Sniff.
All right, after a very, very cold commercial break, yeah, you guys go check out some of our bonus content. You'll see what I mean about that. We are ready to see what Bryce has got cooked up for us. So, who is frozen and who's in heat?
Oh wow!
Oh my god!
Oh wow! I didn't realize it was this kind of podcast.
Bryce, take it away with obviously start with story. What are you thinking?
Okay, so this one was probably the hardest category for me. And what I ultimately decided is which story holds the most nostalgia for me. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that this was probably the episode I've seen the most. I'm going to have to give it to Frozen Ghost.
Maylene and Greta, they're going to be making you a pie later, so check your mail.
And I think that's ultimately the deciding factor for me. The ants in that episode, they're so kooky, so off the wall, and the fact that I think it was you, Courtland, that pointed out that she's doing cross-stitching of a bloody axe. Like, I'm like, Ron Oliver had to be the one to sneak this in. Like, yeah.
One thing I will say about that too is, like, in the tale of the final wish at the beginning with the Midnight Society bit, but Betty Ann is talking about some fairy tale. I don't even know what she's talking about, where they have like a bloody axe. So I like to think it's kind of like a continuity, like Kristen weaved that one in there to appease Betty Ann.
Yeah.
What's the next one? Main characters.
Main characters. So I totally based this one on, like, if I was in each of these episodes as kind of like a third character, who would I most likely want to hang out with? And it's hands down Roxy and Jimmy. Daphne's a little bit too harsh for me, and Charles is a little bit too whiny for me, and I would probably like open the limo door and throw myself out of the car if I had to be with them for that limo ride. I wouldn't even make it to the aunt's house. I would have been fed up with both of them, and so I would definitely go with Roxy and Jimmy for this one. So Fire Ghost.
All right. Ghost character.
Ghost character. Fun fact about me. I don't have kids. I find kids very interesting, intriguing. They make me nervous at times. Now, couple that with a child that is a ghost, that's doubly giving me anxiety. So I think I would rather hang out with Jake in the firehouse than, with two word frozen ghost boy.
He's so cold, Bryce.
So sorry, Courtland, I'm gonna have to go with the fire ghost on this one.
Use of elemental theme.
Well, Courtland, you kind of sealed the deal for this, so it's got to be fire ghost. I mean, even you admitted there wasn't a whole lot of ice to be found in the episode that has frozen in the title. Plus, I think fire plays on childhood fears we all had of, like, not playing with matches and things of that nature. So definitely fire ghost.
And that leaves us with lasting appeal.
Lasting appeal. Ultimately, based on the conversation we had, I'm going to have to give this to Fire Ghost because I'm imagining a scenario where if I have kids one day and I'm introducing them to this, particular show from my own childhood, I think the episode we're going to be able to relate more and have more of a common interest on is the Fire Ghost episode. Fire is universally scary, and the episode is dealing with very topical issues like death and divorce, which I think will be very relatable to certain kids. So I think as far as lasting power goes, that's going to Fire Ghost.
It is not the way I thought that would shake out at all.
Courtland, don't hate me.
Oh, I don't know. I lose all of these.
Wait, we tied, didn't we?
No, what? I think we did. We did it. Stay out of the basement versus dark music.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure stay out of the basement. Won.
Oh man, I can't remember. Well, good job. Well done, Courtland. Well done. Good job. No, noble points for effort, as is said on Angel. But that was a lot of fun. But with that being said, we're going to go into our reviews. And Brett, once again, he had done this for the past several episodes. He did go ahead and give us his review for both of these episodes. So I'll read his, and then we'll see what these gentlemen have to say. But as far as Tale of the Frozen Ghost is concerned, Brett says, it's not my favorite Are You Afraid of the Dark Ghost story, by far, but I do enjoy some of the camera work, which we had alluded to earlier, the tragic ghost story itself, and the rural setting, which I related to as a kid. The whole I'm cold bit gets real old real fast after the first couple of viewings, which is why it's hard for me to revisit this one for fun in my adult years. Points go to it for MJH's cameo, and for some of the footage being reused in the Feel the Fear music video, which Courtland had pointed out earlier. And he gives this a rating of a B, which for our Splat scale is a Splatisfactory. And I will give my review last. So, Courtland, what are your thoughts on the episode?
Well, I said this before, when I did the podcast and revisiting this episode after 20 whatever, how old I am, 20 whatever years, it was probably my weakest episode of season 2. But season 2 is a very strong season for Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Yeah.
So it really was unfair. Now, Ron Oliver has this way about the camera, and he does some amazing shots. Like Brett said, the camera work in this episode is so much fun. You get the aerial shots of like the ants dragging the trunk up. You get the moving shot, the Evil Dead referenced shots. It's a lot of fun. Like as an adult, you can appreciate some other things about it. As a kid, I thought this episode was boring. I didn't like it, and I still don't. I don't love this episode growing up. Like as an adult myself. Melissa Joan Hart definitely plays a huge factor in this one being memorable, as well as just apparently repeating lines over and over again. Not only did you have "I'm cold" repeated so many times, it was in all the commercials. I said that like 6 times. Sorry, but you also have Charles being like ghosts like all the time. And I don't know. I guess if you just repeat something so many times that it just sticks in our millennial brains, and that's all we talk about on Twitter. Overall, though, while I do enjoy the characters a lot in terms of the ants, the ants are like, I don't know. Are You Afraid of the Dark and Old Women are like a match made in heaven. I don't know. That and vampires. They do vampires really well. I'm on tangents here. I'm just stalling. I would give it probably a C. I think it's like an average episode, and that's being generous, I think.
And on our Splat Attack scale, that is a splatverage, so most appropriate. Bryce, what about you?
I'm gonna echo some of the things that have already been said. I think what this episode has going for it is it has good characters, and I wish we got to see those ants again. They really were for me the best part of this episode. And something I don't think we talked about is, the 90s fashion was really represented in this episode. Bandanas, tons and tons of denim. So I gotta give kudos to this episode for really putting, highlighting those trends. But I'm gonna go with Courtland and give this episode a C.
Also a splatverage, and that is exactly what I was going to do as well, a splatverage. It was, I've said this many times, I was too terrified to watch Are You Afraid of the Dark when I was a child. I was a very, very frightful child. So going back and watching it as an adult, this episode I had a hard time getting invested in. When you're getting bored with Melissa Joan Hart as one of your leads, you have a problem. Because Melissa Joan Hart's fantastic. And she really does a great job in just about anything that she's given. And she does take a relatively boring part and give it some life. But and the ants too, or aunts, however you want to pronounce it, they really do a great job at elevating their characters too. But when you have three relatively fun, well-performed characters and your story is so slow and there's really no payoff, there's no real frights, you've got a serious problem. There are things about it that are admirable, like you both have pointed out, and nice little winks and nods and those Ron Oliver touches, but the story really needs to be punched up a lot. It's not awful, it's not good, it is splatverage for sure.
Oh no, this episode's not getting into Harvard.
Oh no.
You know what we forgot to mention though about this episode? Do you remember that part where it gets into like a Scooby-Doo like chase sequence for a moment with Charles? What was that? You guys
all
remember
sped
that?
up. Yeah.
I don't know what the choice was for that.
It felt very Home Alone too.
I'm glad it happened, but I don't know why it happened, and that's all I want to say.
Was there anything else like that the whole episode?
No.
I honestly think they were trying to get to that 22-minute mark. That's the reason why we saw him fall in the mud like 5 times.
Yeah, that's probably it.
For the Tale of the Fire Ghost, once again, we'll start with Brett's review. He says, I want to like this episode more, but the whole story and the nature of the Fire Ghost just feels problematic to me. The only thing I can appreciate here is the evil Fire Ghost's performance, which is hampered by an unfortunate simple defeat on par with Goth from Sorcerer's Apprentice. Shares similar dynamics to the Tale of the Quicksilver's 2 spirit characters, Jake and the Fire Ghost versus Laura and the Quicksilver Demon. Too much focus inside the main firehouse room. Need much more fire action with a greater impact and an exterior location with a fire going on. Take notes from the Tale of the Unfinished Painting, whose dumpster fire during the climax actually engaged me. This tale had potential, but it just fizzled out before it had enough fuel to burn bright. And just like Brett to have a nice little alliteration in his reviews. Not a complaint, just an observation, and I love them. Courtland, what is your rating for Fire Ghost?
This one's a little harder for me to rate. I think I might have seen it less. Like I said when we were talking about it, this was one of those episodes I didn't quite remember everything when I covered it in the podcast, but yet I did have that moment of my life as a child being afraid to look in the eyes of a fire. I don't know. I'm a weird kid. I don't know. But I think this episode, when you said it is underrated, I think that is very true. I don't see people talking about this episode, even though the story is a little out there, like whatever, you gotta suspend your disbelief kind of thing. The makeup in it is good. The characters are great. I love Jake. I love the part where Jake is like, takes one to know one. Jake, get out of here. What are you doing? Like, these kids are in mortal danger. You're just gonna be like, see you kids, I'm out. Like, I don't know. I think it's fun. I like this episode. I think when we rated it back in season 4, it might have been middle of the road. Season 4 for Are You Afraid of the Dark has kind of some ups and downs altogether, especially when you compare it to season 2, where something like Frozen Ghost is kind of bottom of the barrel. I think I may give it an average as well, like a what is it, Splat Bridge?
The Splat Bridge. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I may give it a C for a Splat Bridge as well.
I don't know if did I say that that's what Brett gave it? I know I read his thing. No, I just said his alliteration. But Brett also did give it a C, a Splat Bridge, for clarification for those of you listening. Bryce, what is your review, my friend?
I have similar thoughts to Courtland. One thing I don't think Are You Afraid of the Dark gets enough credit for is how the series from beginning to end kind of grows with his viewers. And I think the reason why a lot of people don't really remember this episode is by the time this episode came out, we were older. We weren't 7 years old anymore. We were heading into middle school. And when you get to that age, you're dealing with more mature themes. And what resonates about this episode is it does deal with some heavier issues that season 1 really wasn't dealing with. And for that, I really appreciate it. I do think it's a kind of an underdog of an episode. And I will say, as much as the Frozen Ghost is kind of an iconic image, seeing that guy with the burnt face, that was pretty terrifying to see. And I'm surprised they were able to get that past, like, the censors for it to be a kids TV show. So I'm actually going to give this a Satisfactory, a B.
All right. And that is actually what I was going to give it, a Satisfactory, a B. I really do like this episode.
I changed my answer. I want to be with the cool kids.
I like it. I like the characters. I really like the ghost. I really, really like the ghost. There is a lot of convoluted things about it, but I don't know. It's fire and it's a ghost, and you don't see those two things together, and that makes a really interesting dynamic to me. And I do like the brother and sister in this episode. It's not great by any means, but I'm not bored, and I really like Jake. Jake was just exuded cool in this episode. I really liked him. And I like the fire ghost. I mean, I like it. I liked everything about this episode, and it's not one that I'm gonna instantly, like Courtland said earlier, I'm not going to instantly tell people who are getting into Are You Afraid of the Dark for the first, oh, you got to check out Fire Ghost. But I think it's a nice B-level story to enjoy after you've gone through some of the big tier stuff. It's good. It's likable. It's highly underrated. Give it a shot with new, fresh eyes and see if you like it any better than you have before. But with that being said, we are going to segue into our wild card segment, which should only take a few minutes. This is going to be a lot of fun. We usually like to do these. So let me get my deck of cards. This is time for wild card. All right, Courtland and Bryce. This is an all-new segment for the two of you. Well, completely new for Bryce. What we've got here is I have a deck of cards here. Spades, diamonds, clubs, hearts, and joker. You will each pick a card, and we are going to reveal another Are You Afraid of the Dark villain. And you are going to compare this villain to the Fire Ghost and Frozen Ghost and see how they stacks up. Which one is worse? Are they tied? What is your opinion on the two? So we'll start with Bryce. Give me your pick a card. Spades, diamonds, clubs, hearts, joker.
Let's go hearts.
Hearts. You have the Water Demons from the Tale of the Water Demons. So another element. How does the Water Demon stack up against Fire Ghost and Frozen Ghost?
Terrifying. Is for starters, it's a lot of them. You can't sleep. They're coming after you the moment you get into REM sleep. It's horrible. They're wet. They're dead and wet. And at least with the Fire Ghost wasn't touching you, or the Frozen Ghost didn't touch anyone. And when those Water Demons grab you, they're gonna leave like their dead fingerprints all over you. Terrifying. Yeah.
So of these three, the Water Demons is the one that gets you the most.
Yes.
All right, Courtland.
They're so wet.
Ugh.
Well, I mean, we talked about being in heat earlier.
I gotta go bed, Alex.
All right. Obviously, you can't. Which one do we just do? Hearts. So you have spades, diamonds, clubs, and joker.
I will do club.
Clubs. We have the Ghost Pilot from The Tale of the Room for Rent.
Not him.
One who looks like John Boy Walton.
Okay. If I had to rate an episode lower than Frozen Ghost, Room for Rent would be lower than Frozen Ghost.
It's a love story. The grandpa and the lady down the street got together.
I love the part where he's cooking like a pot of beans or something, and that ghost is over there trying to like seduce him or whatever. Now, granted, I have not seen The Tale of the Room for Rent since I covered it on the podcast, which was like 3 or 4 years ago. So I have recency bias for Fire Ghost and Frozen Ghost. I like them both better than the pilot from that really boring episode. Like, I think that episode was it was a whoops a little bit, because the story involved in it was just so much more than like a kid would even care about. It is on that like tier of the Long Ago Locket of like, I don't know if it was just me, but like as a kid I couldn't care less about old people and love or like the Revolutionary War or whatever. I was just like, next. I was sitting there flipping the channel when that one came on.
So what you're saying is you do not want to become roommates with the guy you accidentally murdered 50 years ago?
I mean, do you remember that way he was like waving and being all sensual with him though? I mean, that'd be kind of nice to have. Like, you always got a buddy, but nah. He's very invasive of everybody's privacy. Sitting there zooping through walls and everything. I'm like, nah, I don't need that in my life.
I always wondered with that episode, and I know this is so off topic, what was he doing the last 50 years? Like, he literally, I'm like, if this guy is like super old now, you have plenty of time to like approach him about this beef you have with him.
I think it was because he got summoned by Gary's grandma.
That's right. She was performing that ritual. That's right. I forgot.
Yeah, he was.
It's Simpson.
I don't know. Not a kid's appropriate show, in my opinion, but whatever. It was a thing that happened.
All right. And for mine, I am going to pick spades. And for spades, we have the Lonely Ghost from The Tale of the Lonely Ghost.
Jealous.
That was the one that was in the mirror, right?
Yeah.
That one, I did see that one when I was a kid. I did not see Frozen Ghost outside of the commercials. And I did not see a fire ghost because I was terrified, but it was one of those rare instances when I was going, I'll be brave, and I'll watch this one. And I saw the lonely ghost, and I quickly changed the channel, and it took me forever to go to sleep. I would say, of these three, the lonely ghost as a child would have been the one that scared me the most. I don't think I would have been scared of the kid. And the fire ghost, it's fire. Dude, it's fire. Whereas an adult, I think I would still be more afraid of the fire ghost. But that is going to be it for this episode. Thank you both so much for being here. But before we officially close the episode out, we have to have our closing question for all of you Slimesters. Who's your favorite ghost of this episode that we talked about this evening, and why? Would you like to see them go against another 90s Nickelodeon ghost? You can write to us via email at splatattack2021@gmail.com, or you can DM us on Instagram or any of our various socials at Splat Attack Podcast. If you've not already subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do, Splat Attack Podcast, and please interact with us wherever you can find us on social media. I promise we don't bite too bad. With that being said, once again, thank you both so much, Bryce and Courtland, for being here and being part of this episode. It's been a blast to have you both. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. I had a lot of fun tonight.
I did too.
Well, until next time, I guess I'll get to scraping the slime off of this wall. I've got to invite the frozen ghost inside for some milk and cookies before he catches a cold.
Well, make sure the heater isn't too hot in the living room, or else he could melt away.
I'm sure my buddy the fire ghost will keep the flames under control. Isn't that right, Flamey?
I know.
He doesn't really seem like a trustworthy type of guy.
Everything's on fire. Everything's on fire. Everything. Call the fire dogs quick. Splat you later, Slimesters. Hopefully we can douse this fire before everything goes up in smoke.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
I'm out. I'm out.
Excitement? Then pick up a copy of Are You Afraid of the Dark? Ghostly Tales and put a little terror on your tube with two unforgettably ghostly tales. First, it's the tale of the shiny red bicycle, a chilling story about a teenager who must confront his own tragic past. And you'll also get the tale of the frozen ghost, featuring Melissa Joan Hart as a babysitter who joins a young boy in uncovering a spooky secret. Each story comes with a ghostly guarantee to send a chill up even the most fearless spine.